This is Dick Gumshoe. If you couldn't already tell by the way he kind of dresses like Columbo, he's a police detective. But don't let the outfit fool you. Unlike Columbo, he's really not very good at his job. He often comes off as kind of slow and dim-witted, and he's the type that tends to cause more problems than he solves. His bosses really don't respect him, and in fact, they'll routinely dock his already pitifully meager salary every time he slips up, which is a lot. The truth is, he's kind of a sad sack. Now, it's not all bad. I mean, when you get to know him, Gumshoe is actually a really sweet guy. He's very emotionally sensitive. He's got a heart of gold, a really strong sense of justice. He's very loyal to his friends, and he's more than willing to risk his life in a dangerous situation if it means helping someone in need. He really does try his best. It's just that his best isn't often very good. What can you do? Now, with everything I just told you in mind, I want you to ask yourself, if this man, Dick Gumshoe, was a piece of music, what do you imagine he'd sound like? I don't know about you, but if you asked me, he probably wouldn't sound like this. Now, as far as Ace Attorney character themes go, I've always really liked Gumshoe's a lot, for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, it's just a really great tune, but it's also very interesting because it's very unlike other character themes in the series. For example, when you listen to like Maya's theme and you hear that, very bubbly J-pop rhythm and melody with that little tinge of melancholy, it's like, oh yeah, that fits her to a T. That is totally Maya. But what about like Godot's theme, for example? I mean, I'm convinced there is no song on Earth that they could have composed that could possibly fit that guy better than The Fragrance of Dark Coffee does. And yet, with Gumshoe's theme, I'm not sure you get the same impression. I assumed I wasn't alone in feeling this, but just to be sure, I made a community post the other day and asked people to take a listen to Gumshoe's theme and just, ignoring all context from the games and all context about the character, just, what do you think this song sounds like? And the response I got was more or less what I expected. A lot of words like serious and dark and noir-like or determined, investigative. A couple people even said something to the effect of like, now that you mention it, this doesn't really sound like a theme for Gumshoe at all, does it? And I think that's super interesting, right? The other day I was reading an interview between two of the composers for the Ace Attorney series, Toshihiko Horiyama and Noriyuki Iwadare. And they talked a little bit about how they approach writing character themes for the series. And of course, it mostly comes down to, getting a description of the character, getting art of the character, and you're just trying to imagine what they might sound like. But Iwadare asks Horiyama a kind of interesting question midway through where he's like, you never try to write mismatched music for Ace Attorney, right? And Horiyama says no, but he also says that mismatched music can have an interesting effect. It's just something he's never tried. Remember that for later. We're going to return to this interview in a little bit. Anyway, Gumshoe's theme was composed by the original game's composer Masakazu Sugimori, but his approach doesn't really seem that much different from Iwadare and Horiyama's. Like Maya's theme, for example, that matches her design and personality perfectly. There's another character in the first game, Marvin Grossberg, who has a theme that kind of perfectly fits his very suspicious and pathetic personality. And even outside of his work in Ace Attorney, Sugimori's character themes in something like Ghost Trick are so perfect for those characters, like it fits them exactly. So among all of these character themes, Gumshoe's is, in a way, a bit of an outlier. So the questions are, 1. Why is Gumshoe's theme like this? And 2. What is the effect of having a character theme that doesn't seem to perfectly fit the character? We're going to explore those questions and a few other interesting things about this tune throughout the course of this analysis. So I hope you enjoy. Let's jump in. Like I said, when I asked my community about this tune, they used a lot of words like serious or anxious or phrases like, overcoming the odds or, spurred into action or things like that. And this definitely has the kind of harmonic characteristics you'd expect for music used for those kinds of feelings. So for example, we're in a minor key, we're in the key of C minor, and the only real chords that we're getting are C minor, A flat, which is the flat 6, and B flat, which is the flat 7. This is really one of the most common cadences you have in minor key harmony, which is 1 minor, flat 6, flat 7 to 1. So you'll hear that chord progression in all kinds of music that is intended to sound, kind of cool and actiony. Kind of a funny story. I have a friend who makes action games, and he used to compose the music for those games. And I remember a while back, he sent me like a couple of demos of songs he was working on just to ask for my opinion on them. And I was like, these sound, really great, but you realize you're using the same chord progression in all of them, right? Every single song was... And he was just like, no, I didn't realize, but I just thought it sounded cool. And he was right. To the credit of Gumshoe's theme, though, there's a lot of very interesting things happening in the arrangement that adds a little bit of color to this otherwise pretty common chord progression. Like, for example, when we hit the C minor chord and eventually the A flat chord, we get this kind of cool, like, power chord with a ninth on top, so... then on the A flat. And that adds just a little bit of ambiguity to those chords, makes them sound just a little bit more interesting. Plus, there's just, no cooler sound in music than the sound of a clean electric guitar, at least in my opinion. Then we also have this really neat kind of piano ostinato going on over all the chords. It's kind of like... which to me sounds, very internal, very contemplative, kind of like you're thinking things through, which obviously makes a lot of sense for a detective theme, thinking things through, making deductions, that sort of thing. And of course, we can't forget the super sick bass line, right? Ooh! That bass line sort of reveals this tune's origins as, coming from a Game Boy Advance game, because composers back then were very cognizant of the fact that the Game Boy Advance's speakers were really small and really bad, so they tended to write bass lines in a higher register than you typically expect for a bass, and they tended to use samples that were a little bit more punchy sounding than a typical fingered bass sample. They tend to use more like a picked bass sample. Actually, one second. So if this tune were not composed for the Game Boy Advance's tiny speakers, the bass line would probably be down here instead of up here, which is where it is. And the way the bass is typically played with your fingers is a very soft sound that might not cut through the Game Boy Advance's speakers as well as if it were played with a pick, like this. Much harsher. So pay attention to that anytime you're listening to like Game Boy Advance or Nintendo DS music. So yeah, so far this sounds exactly like the kind of theme you'd expect a super cool, confident, and collected and intelligent detective to have. But that's not really Gumshoe, right? Well, let's keep listening. Let's see what the bridge sounds like. So the bridge mostly uses the same chords as the A section, the same kind of 1 minor, flat 6, flat 7 idea, but just with a much busier melody and a faster harmonic rhythm, which basically just means the chords are changing more often. It's like each note of the melody of that first bit is harmonized to the point that you could think of them as different chords, like something kind of like that. I really like that kind of call and response thing that's happening between the main melody and the piano also. So you have like the main melody doing this, and the piano responds with that sort of... The melody also hits some really colorful notes on these chords. Like I love when we get to the end and the melody plays a sort of sharp 4 over the A flat chord. Ooh, that's just gorgeous. I just love how on that final P flat 7 chord we have that piano ostinato from the first section, just kind of creeping its way back in, leading us back to the top. So yeah, to me this is a very serious and cool detective theme, which is used for a very unserious detective. So what gives? Why does Gumshoe get such a cool theme when his character mostly amounts to comic relief? I'm going to propose 2 theories. And the first one has to deal with a problem that I actually encountered myself throughout the course of composing the soundtrack to my own video game. Which, by the way, have you heard of the video game I'm developing? It's called Detective Instinct: Farewell My Beloved, and it's an adventure game similar in style to Ace Attorney about a mysterious woman who goes missing on a train. It's coming out this year on Steam and Nintendo Switch, and it's actually participating in Steam Next Fest right now, so you should definitely check out our Steam page and play the demo and wishlist the game if you're interested. Don't worry, I'll put a link in the description. Now, Detective Instinct also has a police detective character named Daltrey. His personality is not all that similar to Gumshoe's. He's much more confident and kind of jovial, but he's similarly not the kind of person you'd expect to be a police detective. He's very aloof, he's always cracking jokes, he does some very deeply irresponsible things, which you'll see if you play the demo. So initially, when coming up with theme music for him, I tried to write something that really captured those kinds of silly and unserious personality traits that he has. Now, way early in development, we sent the game to a couple of people just to get some impressions, and I was really surprised to see that a handful of the people we sent it to said they really didn't like Daltrey. Like, there was something about his character that just really rubbed them the wrong way, and they were just not getting a good impression for him at all. And I was really confused as to why, because to me he was a really kind of likable and fun character. Then I started thinking, Daltrey's personality comes through very strong in the writing already. Is it possible that giving him this kind of silly theme song that sort of accentuates the more goofy aspects of his personality, it's kind of like putting too much ketchup and mustard on a hot dog or something, where now we're crossing the line from fun into annoying? So I asked myself this question. What would happen if I gave Daltrey a theme that was just kind of unambiguously awesome? So I went back to the drawing board. I ended up writing something that's really not too unlike Gumshoe's theme, although it wasn't directly inspired by it. So, you know, it's in a minor key, it has that same kind of minor key harmony, it has a really energetic and fun bass line, sort of a heroic sounding melody, you know, etc, etc. Now, it's kind of hard to quantify what effect this change in theme might have had on people's perceptions of Daltrey, but I can at least say that whenever I check our feedback form, I see Daltrey's name listed a lot in the question where we ask what people's favorite things about Detective Instinct were. So it's at least safe to say that most people are liking him in the way we intended now. Now think about this in the context of Ace Attorney. Like, there are plenty of characters in the Ace Attorney series that are intended to be annoying, and appropriately, they have kind of silly musical accompaniment. I think of characters like Wendy Oldbag, or like the clown from Justice for All, or God forbid, Spark Brushel. So now imagine if every time Gumshoe showed up, which is a lot, he had a theme that really accentuated, you know, his dopiness and kind of comic relief role in the story. You'd probably get tired of him real fast, right? But instead, every time Gumshoe shows up, I'm super happy to see him because we get to listen to this banger. So if there's a lesson to be learned here, maybe it's that the point of a character theme isn't always to just, you know, quote unquote fit the character. Because if the theme does just perfectly accentuate the most obvious aspects of that character's personality, maybe that character won't actually come across the way you intend them to. So maybe the point of a character theme isn't always to just reinforce a character, but rather show you a side of a character that the rest of the story maybe doesn't, or at least doesn't very explicitly. Now, I want to return to that interview from earlier with Iwadare and Horiyama, where Iwadare asked Horiyama about using mismatched music in Ace Attorney, and Horiyama responded, "No, I don't use mismatched music, but mismatched music can have a very interesting effect." So what do they mean exactly by mismatched music? Well, it kind of reminds me of a story about legendary film director Akira Kurosawa and the way that he tended to use music in his movies. So the story goes, Kurosawa, after hearing about the death of his father, was just in this horrible, depressed daze, and he decided to just kind of walk around town, you know, feeling all of this grief and like heavy emotions from having just lost a loved one. And as he walked past this restaurant, he heard over the loudspeakers this tune called the Cuckoo Waltz. Now this tune is basically just this really insipid and happy sounding waltz, and according to Kurosawa, when he heard this just in his terrible mood, it just made him feel a million times worse because this super happy and insipid music was playing while he was feeling absolutely terrible. So after having this experience, he decided to use the Cuckoo Waltz in a movie he was making called Drunken Angel when the main character was at his absolute lowest point, because he realized that, you know, in a way, happy music can accentuate sadness a lot more than sad music can. So from that point on, Kurosawa started looking at music in film not as something that should just accentuate the action on screen, but rather something that should complicate it or be in contrast with it, because having a contrast between the audio and the visual can create new meaning in an interesting way. So who says we can't try the same thing with a character theme? Let's just think about it, you know, like what new meaning is created by the contrast between Gumshoe as a character and his theme song? Like I said before, I feel like Gumshoe's theme sounds a lot like the kind of theme you'd expect like a real cool and intelligent detective to have. And while Gumshoe himself may not really exhibit those qualities, he does at least, you know, kind of look the part, right? You know, like I said, he does dress like Columbo, and, you know, he really does genuinely try to help people and bring criminals to justice. So maybe in a sense, his theme represents not the person that he is, but the person that he aspires to be. Like, sure, Gumshoe is incompetent and bumbling, and he's getting things wrong all the time, but he's such a nice guy that you're always rooting for him to do something right and to pull through, and those rare times where he does and you hear that theme kick in, man, it's just so cathartic, you know? He's finally become a person worthy of that theme. Even if it's only for a minute. You know, when you think of it that way, it honestly makes me kind of emotional. Like, he may not be Columbo, but my God, does he try his best. So, you know, maybe Gumshoe's theme isn't ill-fitting for his character. Maybe we just have to broaden our idea of what a fitting character theme actually means. By using interesting contrast, we can create character themes that don't just reinforce aspects of the characters that we already know, but instead show us new sides of those characters or encourage us to perceive them in a slightly different way. So while Gumshoe may not be very smart, or very good at his job, or very good at much of anything, sometimes, when he's really needed most, he tries his best and he steps up, and his theme really foreshadows those moments where he's at his best and he becomes the man he aspires to be. And that doesn't sound ill-fitting at all to me. But what do you think? What's your favorite character theme from the Ace Attorney series, and are there any other themes that you think reveal hidden depths to the characters? Please let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you liked and subscribed to see more stuff like this. And don't forget to check out my game Detective Instinct on Steam. I think you might like it. Link in the description. Well, alright. Until next time, everybody. Peace.